got here? I changed it up for you. I changed it up. You like this? I like it too. It's kind of like a tracksuit, except it's got this like almost like this metallic thread through it. Zips up all the way. It looks kind of modest. Sure would have a different compartment if I was a man, but I'm not. My hair. How's my hair look? Huh? Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. I got some distinguishing gray streaks these days. It's kind of nice. I kind of like it. You know, I met this woman, and she was this Christian woman, and she was from the evangelical tradition, and she was not from America. And I've had this thing ever since I first encountered them. There's something about those evangelical women from south of the border. They got a lot of spiritual energy, man. You ever fucking get one of them in an actual ritual? You don't want to be fucking with them. Last thing you want is for them to think you're the Satan. Let me tell you. Men, I mean, that's one thing. Evangelical men, that's one thing. But those evangelical women, those priestesses, the women that do the preaching, is one of like the forces of God you just gotta watch out for. And you really gotta hope they don't try to make you into the Satan, because you could get screwed. If you got anybody in your network, you could get screwed. You really could. They got something about them though. When they get into a certain level, I think they just kind of think that because they're blessed from God and they're willing to go there with like the serious demonic realms, that they can pretty much get away with anything they need to do. Try to chastise, excoriate, or otherwise revile that demon. So you gotta watch out. But you also gotta watch out when somebody tries to do something stupid, like curse one of them. Especially if she's a spiritually powerful woman, but she's also incredibly compassionate and incredibly brilliant and incredibly grounded and also very, very loving and abundant. Just one of these women. There's some women that just like radiate abundance. It's amazing how fertile they are spiritually. And it's a very sad thing when they're exploited, but it's an even worse thing when somebody tries to curse them specifically connected to their faith. I'm not an evangelical Christian. My concept of Christendom's totally fucking different, okay? But in a certain realm, when you see somebody that's sincere about their faith, even if they have a warrior mentality about them, and even if you know that you don't want to be on the other side of that condemnation, then there's a certain respect, at least me personally, that I have, especially if they're spiritually powerful, and especially if they're sincere. And when you try to curse them in a way that's meant to humiliate them, specifically for their faith, this is a travesty on a very significant level. Now, when I met this woman, let's just say this particular characteristicization was not who and how I was around her. She brought out a very important part of me that unfortunately is not around much these days. But one of the things they did to her is they took her business license and they coded it to the mark of the beast, 666. And for her, this was a major curse. This was an affliction. For her to have this number, especially on her business license, was tantamount to a curse, a spiritual curse. And it wasn't her fault. And I knew that. I knew because of her name and because of other associations, and some jackass at the fucking license office thought it would be cute to give her this number and fuck with her. And especially with what she was going through, they thought that they would have a little fun and at her expense in connection with the mark of the beast, especially because of her faith tradition. But, you know, at the time, I was only coming to consciousness about their little USMCA bullshit. And my dad was in the Marine Corps. And my dad had the mark of the beast in his social security card. In his social security number, he has three consecutive sixes. It just happened that way. My dad was who my dad was. My dad was not overtly a Christian. He never espoused himself as a Christian when I was growing up. I never knew him to be a Satanist, let's put it that way, but he was a devil dog. He was in the Marine Corps. They had this saying, and on the eighth day, God opened the gates of hell, and then the Marine Corps was born. What does that mean? Is that like the concept of justice? You know, this whole eighth day justice? Does it mean that you let the dogs out? You thought you knew what you meant, right? Who let the dogs out? Maybe it was God. You know what I'm saying? So for me, having this mark, it's almost like God's last laugh. It's like you can't really use it against me. It's just not possible. It's one of those things God gave me. It's how when I see a holy woman that's being afflicted, I don't get dissuaded. Even if I don't agree with that faith tradition, even if it's not mine, it doesn't offend me, but it also doesn't deter me. But it gives me almost like I don't know how to put it, almost like the reflection or the inversion of the evil eye. I know when you're looking at her with an evil eye. I know when you see something you want to exploit. I know what you're churning, what you're cogitating and planning and plotting, and all your sweet little words don't sound so sweet when you can see that way. It doesn't matter if it's in English, and it doesn't matter if it's in Spanish, and oftentimes it doesn't matter if it's in another language, even if I don't know how to speak it. I can see how you're looking at her. So it's almost like God gave this as a sort of etheric element, a little extra, an extra electron maybe, something that just pings, and depending upon where you're at, it may or may not ripple in particular manners for a particular amount of time. Now, I'm not, always the most stable element in the compound. I'm not gonna lie, but it didn't disturb me, and it was not a problem when several years later somebody thought they'd fuck with me by putting a 666 in the third birth certificate I had to acquire in 3 years. I was like, okay. See, if you are in hell, don't you want to get out? It's kind of how I look at it. You're in hell. Who's going to get you out of hell? Especially without prostituting, without dealing drugs, without killing babies, without fucking babies. Who's going to get you out? You know? Why am I bringing this up now? Why am I bringing this up? Why is it so important? Is it because of that 20%? 20% means different things to different people. I understood at one point in time 20% is what a whistleblower was due for recovery when they were able to successfully prove their claim and the federal government had not interceded or intervened to assist them or to offer them formal support in a process for redress when they had experienced retaliation as a whistleblower. It also is a metric that is connected, at least in the state of Texas, to the Texas Penal Code concerning trafficking. But, after a while, somebody thinks they're going to ride a little 666 themselves, and then they try to twist it around into all kinds of things until finally you realize there was a 20% concession for uranium that somebody agreed to when she had access to minor children. See, my whole thing is I believe that what Hillary Clinton did, not just Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and perhaps even the Bush administration before them. I believe that they took some beautiful young girls and maybe some boys. You never know. There's a reason those sailors got so friendly. I believe they took some beautiful young girls and they made a swap. They swapped out some American girls for some Russian girls, some Belarusian girls, maybe a couple Kazakhstani girls, you know. And at some point, somebody was supposed to be able to make the conveyance, you know. Maybe some of them would live. Maybe some of them would mature into their half life. And maybe some of that decaying spent fuel would get a little rejuvenation. I think that's the 20% she offered. And I think at some point she tried to get it as leverage to help her out because her husband wanted a cut himself. I think that's really what the Epstein situation's about. I think that's why it's so anti Semitic. And I think it's why they waited so damn long to get anything on it. And I think that's why, at a very strategic time, he died. He died in his cell. He committed suicide, which also happened to be on the flip of somebody else that had been alleged to have committed suicide, right? And I think that there were other girls that weren't from rich families and didn't get on the jet rides and didn't consummate at the time, but were expected to consummate later. They were the long cell. And they were nuked at the beginning, but back in the day, that uranium is good. You ever been around highly enriched uranium right after it's been enriched? Everybody wants that shit. Everybody wants that. Now, you may not want to be the one to enrich it, let me tell you. Especially if you're capable of highly enriching uranium and they want you to go low enriched. Right? I don't know. There's some affirmative action sometimes in the nuclear realm nobody wants to talk about. Speaks to why and how they value those things to begin with, right? But there were some nuclear assets that were meant to be engaged at their half-life. And they were meant to be made available for acquisition a little further down the road. Not all of them were meant to be what do they call them? Dirty bombs. Okay? Not all of them were. But if you were mouthy and you didn't take your medication and you didn't direct that energy at the right target at the right time because you were trying to drive your own vehicle, and maybe you didn't get into the darker realms of the Satanists that wanted you to do completely disgusting and inappropriate things, but think somehow you were shielded because of some illusion that rather than being a nuclear asset, you were a holy woman, then these things can get recharacterized. And so it's hard to say anymore what percentage is for whom at what point in time, right? But it seems that I got my 20% after all. And this brings me back to what I was talking about earlier when I wrote that report for the auditor. Now they've defaulted. They've defaulted. And they know it. And at some point, I think that Miss Clinton decided she was going to broker her futures and the futures of other people, including some of those nuclear assets that had reached their half-life but hadn't been quite as de-riched. Right? I think that they based this time right now on strategic defaults, specifically connected to the uranium trade, and that for the last 5 years actively, but for the last 10 years specifically, that processes that have been ongoing at Cameco, specifically connected to labor management relations, as well as various contract concessions or cancellations, were timed and strategically coordinated in order to create nuclear hedges with the express intention of defaulting later on as a means by which to escalate an effort to complete the dirty warfare that had been started over 25 years ago. That there was this situation of ever increasing depravity. It's another kind of dimension to what I call competitive deprivation, or rather competitive depravity. See, there's deprivation, this concept that you have to compete with other people to prove you're more deprived than them, so you're worthy of attention, you're worthy of emergency consideration, you're worthy of some sort of compassion or sympathy or deferment. That's deprivation. And you're supposed to compete with other people that are relativistically deprived compared to how you're able to market your deprivation. But then there's competitive depravity. It's almost this understanding of somebody's concept of deterrence. That what I'm doing is so morally offensive to you that you will concede. That you're so ashamed and you're so disgusted that you would never expose what's really happening. You would never expose what we're really doing because it's that depraved. And somehow, if you've been humiliated or you've been slandered or somebody revealed something that you did, it was a little bit illegal, but maybe connected to something you did so that they didn't find out that was really illegal, then you try to get people, you try to recruit people to engage in this escalation of depravity as a deterrent, as an understanding that we will stand by each other and we will support each other in our depravity, and understand that we can throw it in their face at any time and it will wield the kind of leverage we need to destabilize them or disempower them or debase them, as in take away their base in one manner or another. And I know what this is like on a particular level. I think that part of how they nuked me was to characterize me as being depraved in a particular manner that compelled other people to remove themselves from overt association. You know, and it's certain things I've done in my past may or may not have actually been considered depraved acts by certain kind of sociocultural context. And certain things I even thought may have been considered depraved. But when you don't know anybody else's psychic, or that you have literally had your thoughts, processes harvested and extracted for other people's enrichment, right? It's different than when you know and you sit there and you cultivate and you intend and you intention and you create and you discuss and you promulgate and you slander and you lie and you compile and you watch pornography. You create pornography. You do role playing. You do simulation. You do psychological stress tests. You do underwriting in legal documents. You do underwriting in large scale securities deals. You juxtapose those with images of pornography as an overlay to other transactional processes. Certain people are supposed to be inured to it, supposed to be immune to it, but it manifests in the unconscious. And so then the level of deprivation or depravity gets to things that are taboo, right? Children, old people, disabled people, dead people. Oh, God. You know? And so the commingling, the constant nuking, how does it express itself? How lucrative does it become? What ends up happening to that 20%? Do you try to trade it? Do you try to sell it? Do you want it anymore? Do you need it anymore? Do you throw it back at them? You know? See, I would have preferred to have not had anything to do with fucking uranium at any grade, to be honest with you. I just would have preferred to have had all kinds of other options in my life. But when you find out that the president literally sold you for acts of prostitution that were intended to materialize 10, 20 years down the road, and that when you didn't complete one, they were able to finance a nuclear attack on a country. kind of changes your mind. It kind of makes you very concerned about this kind of market competition. So now we're at this point where I don't follow Cameco anymore. The original stock certificate that branded me as an asset by local interlocutors in connection with portfolios that had other interlocutors. I don't have that anymore. Somebody stole that, did something with it. It was issued on the same day as two different presidential executive orders under the current president that actually themselves create a sort of contrasting nuclear paradigm that's actually continued. It's recalibrated aspects of the pre existing nuclear paradigm, specifically with allegations of executive malfeasance. Now, the allegations against the current president are distinct from the allegations that were never prosecuted against former presidents, right? But there's other things. There's those aging assets that may or may not have performed as appropriate. And there is the manner in which one can characterize them as depraved without actually revealing the depravity. So then we get into the current paradigm of abstraction, and we realize those 50 adopted sons of Arafat weren't Arafat's sons, and the Palestinians were just a state of mind. That really what it was about was trying to dispossess a specific group of people of an inheritance that they were supposed to come into once certain obligations had been fulfilled concerning the fact that they had been on the losing side of a conflict, and as a matter in consideration of the reconstruction following that conflict, that there was a certain amount of time that people that were otherwise beneficiaries of that legacy were supposed to be involved in processes of repatriation and repayment and reclamation in consideration of a concession accorded to those who did not win that battle. And that these terms were very long, multiple generations. Your father had to go through it, your grandfather had to go through it, and maybe if you get through it, you might have a chance to be a part of a different kind of paradigm, especially if there's other people in other places that had something like that. That's kind of what a world war will do, right? It's one of the things we were supposed to have been figuring out in the 20th century. We were supposed to be figuring this out. And if you got some of those holdings that were in America for a while, and they changed the law before that 100-year term is up, and you can't actually redeem that paper domestically, somebody might be hedging that they can get it somewhere else a little later on. And bam! Great opportunity. What is this European bank doing? Adopting American accounts? That sounds like just the opportunity we need, man, because you could go over there and you can cash it in. And we didn't do that buyback in the 70s. We still got our certificates. But, it's not just about paper, right? At some point, if you're an asset, you're supposed to convey. Is there a statute of limitations on that conveyance? Or do you just keep nuking the bitch and nuking the bitch and nuking the bitch and nuking the bitch, and then nobody wants to convey with her? Maybe you can get a piece of paper on her death. And I know that there's quite a few women in their half-life that were eligible for that conveyance that ended up as nothing more than a piece of paper that somebody flipped. And I'm pretty determined not to be one of them. See, there are some papers that I want to have acknowledged. I'm not gonna lie. And I don't want a fucking Ramirez to get her fucking name on it. And I don't want a fucking Harris to get her fucking name on it. So I think that pretty much is where we're at. We're 24 minutes in, a little under 25.